Well, why don't we get started? My name is Anil Kanda. I want to welcome everybody to CCC Young Adults Growth Labs. Today we have a very special presentation. Ricky Camacho, a very good friend and someone who's very talented in many areas, has decided to share with us about gardening. And I think this is going to be a very incredible time for us to learn and grow, not just a new skill for maybe some vegetables or fruits that we want to grow, but it's also very much a spiritual experience as well. You know, from the very beginning, Adam was a gardener, right? And God himself is a gardener. And we know, this is what's really interesting, we know for a fact, biblically, that gardening will always be a possibility for God's people, the world, until the second coming. And you're saying, wait a minute, now how in the world would you know something like that? You know how I know? Because of what God told Noah after the flood was over. The Bible says these words, Noah, after he made an altar and sacrificed to God after the flood, God says these words, while the earth remains, that's the criteria, the earth will remain all the way till the second coming, right? Seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease. He says, seed time and harvest will remain. As long as the earth remains, seed time and harvest will remain. So this process of growing and gardening and seeds and harvesting will be a process that will remain all the way until the second coming. And we know that the Bible tells us in Isaiah, we'll experience a bit of gardening too in the new heavens, new earth. Well, I don't want to take too much time. You're not here to see me or hear me. I want to give the time over to Ricky, and I want to welcome everybody again to this Growth Labs. Just a reminder, please keep your audio on mute. And if Ricky asks a question, again, you can unmute yourself, but then put yourself back on mute. Towards the end, we'll have a bit of question and answer. So, Ricky, I'm going to say a word of prayer, then I'm going to give the time over to you, okay? Why don't we bow our heads for a word of prayer, and we'll get started. Father in heaven, thank you again for this special time. We pray, Lord, that you would inspire us, invigorate our hearts and minds, and, Lord, show us, even with something like gardening, just the potential that's there. Thank you again in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, Ricky, I'm going to give the time over to you. I'm going to mute myself. So,
all right, sounds good. Thank you, Anil. Yeah, I'm thankful for the opportunity to be able to share with you a little bit about gardening. I love gardening, actually. So when they asked me to share, I was excited about that. So why don't we begin? We've already prayed, and let's begin. Hopefully we can learn a thing or two here in this little growth lab. So the first thing I want to ask you is, how many of you know where this picture is from? What time period in U.S. history? Can anybody tell me? You're probably on mute, but what do you think it is? It's Pearl Harbor, right? If you're not responding, it's Pearl Harbor. And this was kind of the beginning of the war, of World War II for the United States entering into the war. And it was during this national crisis, the war, going on. Many people were home in the homestead, and then many people were fighting overseas in the war. And it's kind of interesting. During this time, one of the things that the government actually did to boost morale, actually, back home, was to start victory gardens. So you probably heard of a victory garden. Here it says, dig for victory, grow your own vegetables. So it kind of had a twofold purpose during this national emergency. It was, first of all, to supplement their own food supply, right? Food supply was short during the war, so they could supplement their food, and also to boost morale. It's kind of interesting. There's something about gardening that boosts our morale. It's like you go out there and you work and you get yourself dirty, and then at the end of it, you have a reward. You have a fruit. You have a vegetable that you can actually harvest and eat. and or share with others. So it's really awesome. It's kind of interesting that happened right now. We're dealing with a national emergency, right? And this is what's going on in our world today. But so today we're going to be talking about this, about gardening a little. And how many of you have actually started a garden or have a garden currently right now? If you could just raise your hands, I can kind of see some of you. Thumbs up. So a lot of you probably have had a garden, right? So that's very good. So we're going to kind of go over some of the basics of how to start a garden from scratch as well. I wanted to mention here little plant. If you've ever seen a pineapple plant, that's how it grows. But let me share with you some benefits of gardening before we begin, okay? So first of all, when we garden our own food, we are more prone to eat those fruits and veggies, right? So it makes it a lot easier, especially for younger kids, help them grow their own food and they'll want to eat it themselves as well. Number two, it actually saves some money, right? Everything's so expensive. Right now we're growing an avocado tree. Hopefully soon it's going to produce fruit, but that's going to save us a lot of money. There's a study done. It actually showed that there, on average, like per season, in the US, a household can actually save close to $500 worth of groceries just by gardening. So it's an intense incentive to save some money, right? You also get some exercise. It's good to go outside. I actually want to focus on this, on your mental health. There's been some fascinating studies on mental health, especially in our society. So many people deal with mental health issues, depression, anxiety, and there's been a lot of studies. You can look these up later on, but gardening has actually been shown to kind of lower the cortisol level. So it reduces stress, which of course stress leads to so many other diseases as well. And there was some recent studies that came out as well. And notice what it says here. It says, "Is dirt the new Prozac?" It talked about some of the microbes in the soil that they actually were as good as Prozac. So it's kind of a natural antidepressant, and it helps with anxiety as well. So it's interesting during these times when a lot of people are anxious, a lot of people are not sure of what's going to happen in the future. One of the best things you can do is go outside and start planting a garden. It's going to help you. Your mental health is going to improve. You're going to have less stress. Turn off the television and go plant a garden. It's going to help you so much. It refreshes you. It really does. So some of you can probably relate. When you garden, don't you feel better? Whenever I garden, I feel so much better. I'm so much happier after I garden. There's so many ways of gardening. Anybody can garden. You can garden if you live in the country, of course. If you live in the city, there's urban gardens. There's, in a small area, you can, in containers, on walls, and so forth. So there's many different ways of gardening. And let me tell you why, as Christians, we should garden. As Christians, we should garden because, in 1 Corinthians 3 and verse 9, it actually says that we are God's field. Like we're a plant to God, and he's kind of giving us the nutrients we need to grow, right? By looking at getting the sun and the water, the word of God, and so forth. We grow as Christians. There's a lot of parallels to gardening in the Bible, all over the Bible. And as Anil mentioned earlier, we were actually placed in a garden at first. So it's really important for us to do that. Also, Psalms 1 and verse 3 talks about, the Christian being planted next to the river, and he's like a tree, right? So over and over, you see Israel is called like a vine and so forth. So over and over, you see all these parallels. So there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from gardening. So many object lessons that God wants to teach us. So we should definitely learn. And especially as Adventists, in our prophetic framework, we believe that, things are going to go down. Daniel chapter 3 and Revelation 13 talks about this, things that are happening. For example, this verse here, it's a famous verse that we quote as Adventists, and that no man might buy or sell. They might not buy or sell, save he that had the mark of the name of the beast or the number of his name, right? So you've read this verse before. talking about the mark of the beast and so forth. So it's talking about this, and here there's some sort of restriction that you're not going to be able to buy or sell, right? Just like we've gone to the store recently and we've looked for toilet paper or for Clorox wipes or something, and they're all out. We can't find anything. So there's some sort of restriction, some sort of government restriction we see in Revelation 13. And I want you to notice, it's kind of interesting. Spirit of Prophecy actually mentions something interesting here. She says, again and again, the Lord has instructed that our people are to take their families away from the cities into the country. Now notice this, where they can raise their own provisions, where they can raise their own provisions, where they can garden, where they can grow their own food, right? And notice why. The context of this is actually Revelation 13. She says, for in the future, the problem of buying and selling will be a very serious one. So it's the context is Revelation 13. We should learn to garden in context of Revelation 13. Are you with me? So it's important for us to learn how to garden. I think it has, we can go on this, but I think you guys get the point that it's important for us, even prophetically. Like, we don't know what's going to happen in a few months. If this quarantine continues, like, we're going to need to provide for ourselves, right? And we're called to do this. So it's very important to do this. Okay. So let's go on. We're gonna go through 4 different steps of how to plan our garden. And this is kind of an introductory course, just on kind of an overview of starting a garden. Okay. So the first step basically is in planning your garden, you want to choose what to plant, right? So here's 3 things that you can think about when you're deciding what to plant. First one is what grows in your area. So if you live in Alaska, your planting options are going to be different than if you live in Southern California or in Colorado, or you get the point, right? So what grows in your area and what you enjoy. If there's certain vegetables you don't enjoy, why are you going to plant them? You're not going to eat them and they're just going to rot. So you don't want to do that. And also, if you're a beginning gardener, you want to choose easy crops that are easy to grow, and will make it easier. If you plant easy crops, something like a squash or something that's fairly easy to grow, it'll make you feel good, and then you can go on to the next step and so forth, right? So what grows? So let me just give you a little overview about like the different crops. So but just for our sake, just made it nice and simple. There's cold season crops, right? So stuff like broccoli, kale, lettuce, beets, carrots, cauliflower, a lot of these greens, right? And usually these seeds will, you can read there, 40 degrees or cooler, seeds will germinate, right? And then you have warm season crops such as tomato, squash, eggplant, cucumber, some of these plants that are growing now in our season. And these usually need 50 degrees or warmer. That's when the seeds will germinate. And the reason why you don't want to mix them, like you don't want to plant necessarily, in gardening, there's always exceptions and there are general rules because it's different in many respects. There's no definite line many times in how you do things. But for example, in warm season crops, you don't want to plant crops that are for the cold season and vice versa, because if you do that, then it's going to be, they're not going to grow as well. It's going to be more green and not the fruit is not going to be well. The only exception is something like in warm season, you can actually plant like beets, carrots, some of those will actually grow in warm season temperature as well. So you have to kind of choose, right? So right now it's the spring. So you want to start thinking about some of these warmer season crops, right? So we're planning. So I want you to be thinking about this, of what you're going to plan for your gardening. There's also different levels that we live in, different areas, and that will determine what kind of fruits you can grow, what kind of vegetables you can grow in your different areas. I suggest you check out this page here, burpee.com, growing calendar. Just check it out. Website. I like it. All you have to do is put in your zip code, and it tells you where you are, we here in the Central Valley are 9, right? So it's kind of neat. You can kind of choose which vegetables you want to pick. So I just put onions and Brussels sprouts there, and then it tells you. Thankfully, in the valley, we can grow almost anything because it's a mild temperature here. And then it tells you there, okay, so you can start these outdoor in February, or you can transplant the onions in the end of January, and so forth. You see that. And if you put in your zip code, and that vegetable doesn't really grow well in your area, then it's just going to say not recommended in your area. So it's kind of nice. Technology makes it easy for us to know. So that's a place you want to start, knowing what you want to grow, right? Herbs. You guys love herbs, so you guys can grow cilantro or basil, or dill, all these different things. Here's a little breakdown. These go, you can break these down into the actual vegetables as well. So for example, you have annuals. Annuals they basically live for 1 season and then they die, right? And biennials they're usually for 2 seasons and then they die. At the end of the first season, they bloom and then they give life one more time. And then perennials come back year after year. They're kind of slow and steady. I was telling you, like, there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from gardening for our own Christian experience. For example, what kind of Christians does God want us to be? Does he call us to be annuals or perennials, right? If we are just going to burn through and share the gospel. And sometimes he's called people to do that and then die. You can get examples of that in the Bible. So that he wants us to be perennials, just slow and steady, keep producing fruit year after year, year after year, right? So there's a lot of lessons you can learn in this all. So another thing to think about, I know this is a lot, but you can pause it and watch it later as well, is like a crop rotation. Crop rotation is important for you to think about because we're still in the planning stage, right? The planning stage is a little bit bigger and then the others are shorter. So don't worry. You want to be able to rotate your plants. So for example, when we draw out where we're going to plant our carrots or our tomatoes, you want to be able to rotate, like 1 year in this bed, I'm going to do carrots. The next year, I'm going to do tomatoes. The next year, I'm going to do beans. You kind of rotate them for several reasons. One of the reasons is it helps with insects. If you have the same crop over and over, a lot more insects tend to grow in that area. And also, one of the things is, for example, if you keep one specific plant in the same area, there's nutrients that plant needs, and it grabs onto those nutrients. And eventually it's going to deplete the soil of that nutrient. So you want to be able to move it around. We actually see this in the Bible as well. Like there was sabbaticals for the land so that it can rest and regain some of its nutrients as well. So it's kind of interesting. There is, you can kind of see an example there of the crop rotation, right? So as I said, it helps with insects. It helps reduce nutrient depletion. There's this good book I recommend. I read this book a while ago. It's called Carrots Love Tomatoes. And it's kind of interesting because it just shows how certain vegetables go with other vegetables, how they complement each other. So you want to put them together, or some of them you want to stay away because then they compete against each other for the same nutrients. If you guys are interested, you guys can check that out later. For example, it talks about different things that you can do. For example, garlic. How many of you like garlic? Garlic is great. So you can actually place garlic, and it's good for like pests. So you can put it on the garden and it helps out a lot. Just keep it away from certain vegetables because then some of the flavor goes into it, and then you're going to be in trouble. So that's that. So where do you want to plant and why? Very simple. Our plants need the sun for photosynthesis, right? So that they can grow. So look for sunny areas and also look for shaded areas. So when you're planting your garden, because we're going to draw out our garden, what we're going to place in different areas, you're basically looking for the sunniest areas. And this is a way, whenever you get a little bag of seeds or a transplant, you can look on the tag and it'll tell you if it needs like full sun or partial shade or full shade. So just know, you can kind of think about your own home and think about, okay, well, in this part of my home, I get full sun. So the veggies that need full sun, I'm going to plant there, and so forth and so on, right? You got it? So you want to do that. You want to think about the angle of your sun during different seasons as well, because when summer comes, the sun is higher, of course, and when winter comes, it's lower. So you have more shade, different areas, unless you live in Ecuador, then it's pretty much always above you, right? So here's a few examples of shade. It's usually the cooler ones, right? So like kale, parsley, lettuce, some of these things, these are cooler, so they can afford some shade, like 4 hours or less and so forth. So you can see that there. So now this is one of the fun parts. You actually get to draw your own garden. So you draw your own garden, draw your home, and you can kind of see the different areas. You know, if you don't have a lot of space, you can make a vertical garden. You can plan for vertical garden. There's a lot of different ways that you can do it. Bring them up. Squash goes up. Tomatoes can go up. Beans go up. There's a lot of different ones that go up vertical. There's also containers. If you don't have a lot of space, there's containers you can plant in. Some beautiful romaine lettuce there. So for example, this is our garden here. So Gabby drew this for us, and we kind of planted out what we're going to do. And, you know, we live in a residential area. We don't live out in the country at the moment. So we don't have a whole lot of space. So we try to maximize as much as we can. So you can see on the top left, we kind of have a little peach tree, avocado tree. I have a zucchini in between, tomatoes and potatoes. And then there's a shed, right? So the shed, it's actually a little further this way, like the lemon tree and peach tree are a little bit more away from the shed. But behind the shed, there's like some cactus, nopales, right? They don't need as much sun. So, cause it's shady over there. So we have that. Then we have some mint that grows pretty much everywhere. And then some peppers and so forth there. So you can kind of plan it out. All right. So you need to basically draw out a map of your garden and decide, I'm going to put this here and I'm going to put this here, and this grows good. And you know, one of the things that you can do is, I'm not looking at the chat, by the way, if you guys are asking questions, I'm sorry about that. But one of the things that you can do is just go to a nursery. If you have any questions, you can ask me, Anil, as well. But you can go to a nursery. Like these guys at the nursery, most of them don't go to Walmart. They sometimes don't know what's going on. But if you go to a nursery, these guys really know what's going on. They've been there. They know the area. They know what grows. So it's really helpful. Sometimes I just go to the nursery just to talk to the guys and pick their brain on things. So I've always wanted an avocado tree, right? And I had one before and it always died in the winter. So I went to this guy at the nursery, and he gave me some really good pointers, and it's starting to grow. So I'm excited about that. So that's what happens. All right. So you're going to draw 2. The other steps are shorter. The step 2 is planting your garden. So you want to start planting. Now that you planned it out, you know which types of veggies you have and so forth. Here's some tools. You can look these up. You don't need all of these. They're just some of the basic ones that you can use. I use the loophole a lot for weeds and so forth, and then the hand hoe, I use that a lot just for digging and so forth. So it makes it nice and easy. So there's a lot more tools that you can use, but here are some basic ones that you can have that are really useful. So one of the things you want to do is really prepare your soil. Like your soil is probably the most important thing in your garden. If you have bad soil, you're going to have a bad crop. It's probably not going to grow correctly. So it's so important. Like this is foundational. This is really foundational that you have good soil. So how do you know if you have good soil? So there's a few things that you can do. If you have about $50 or $60, you can send a sample of your soil to different labs, and they will analyze it for you, and they will make recommendations of what kind of things you can add to your soil to make it better. I'll give you a link. There's this one in Minnesota that's really good that you can use, and they basically tell you exactly.
I need to make more.
What was that? Are you trying to? All right, I'm unmuted. Okay, cool. So as I was saying, this field test is really important. Another thing, if you don't want to spend $50 or $60 to do that, a simple thing that you can do, probably one of the most important things you can do, is just check the pH level of your garden. They sell tests for like $10 at any hardware store. You can go to a hardware store, this pH test, and you can there's different methods. Usually mix it in with some water, but be sure to use undistilled water, because rainwater is acidic and tap water is more alkalinized, so that can kind of interfere with it. So just follow the directions on your specific test, right? So you can do that. Compost is another way that you can better your soil. Just adding some of the leftover food that you're eating, some plants and so forth. Some of your fruits and so forth, just add them, your scraps and so forth, you can add them there, and then mix them in with some of the soil, and also with even grass clippings you can put on there. A lot of the green, just mix it and add some worms or something so you can eat it up. So you can do that. Then the last thing you want to do here is basically till the ground. So you want to till the ground, make sure the ground is nice, work it hard, usually about a foot in to the dirt. You mix it in. Once you start working it, so you work it and you add different fertilizers. You can add starter fertilizer if you'd like. So you do that. You kind of prepare your soil, and the ideal pH is about 6.5. And basically why pH is important, right? 6 is kind of the lowest you want, and 7 is the highest, but the ideal is 6.5. The reason why you want good pH is because it allows living organisms to live in your soil, worms and so forth, healthy ones that will go ahead and eat that stuff, and they will, whatever they throw out will be beneficial for your garden as well. I'm gonna skip this so we can keep going, but these are some of the things that can help your ground. Another thing you want to think about is irrigation. If you have a small garden, you don't really have to worry about this. You can just use a water can. I saw this guy, followed this guy on Instagram. His name, I think it's Homestead Farmer, something like that. I can share it with you. He's in Sacramento, and he kind of grows a lot of fruits and veggies there in a small scale area. And you can kind of see they sell these soaker hoses really cheap, like $10 to $20, and you can just put them there a little bit under your soil, and you don't really have to worry about watering your soil. It'll always be watered, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But you can do that. Then you have to decide if you want transplants or seeds, right? So transplants or seeds, it's important. If you're a beginner, it's probably best to start with transplants. They're already grown. They've already been through some things. You can look up on YouTube for, how to do seeds. And of course, some veggies you have to use seeds no matter what, because you can't really transplant a beet, for example, right? So that's that. Transplants, you just want to minimize the shock, right? So you're introducing them to a different area, so minimize the shock with them. You can look this up of how to do that with a specific veggie. Just try to be careful with that. You can add fertilizer, like starter fertilizer, to kind of boost it at first. You also want to transplant at the right time. Usually the spring, like right now, we're kind of closing in on the time period where it's becoming too late. So if you want to do that, you need to do it right away. And also in the fall, it's a good time. The winter is not a good time, or the summer is not really a good time. So just be careful with those things. Something I like to do is remove the bottom leaves. So when you plant, you remove the bottom leaves to kind of so that it can focus its energy on growing upward a little more. How many of you know what this is? This is a sucker. That's right. It's a sucker. They have no purpose in life. So you basically want to get rid of them. So a lot of this is a tomato plant. Of course, you want to get rid of it. So you can rip these things off, cut them off so that it can focus more on your vegetables growing a little higher. Okay. So now you've planted them, you have your garden, you worked your soil, you chose what you wanted, you drew it out and you planted them, you worked the soil. Now, how do you maintain it? Just a few things that you can do to help maintain your garden. Basically, you want to look at it daily. Our garden, I go out there every single day. Even if I don't do anything to it, I just look. Just go out there and see what's going on. You also want to have some plant care. I'll tell you what happened to us the other day. You want to water properly. You want to add fertilizers, and you also want to have weed control. So the other day, like earlier this week, I went out there and I saw two of our plants were like this. They were missing a bunch of leaves and holes and stuff. So I'm like, what's going on? So we started investigating, and guess who I found? Found this evil little guy. And he was a culprit. He was the one doing this, and he had a very salty ending. Let's just leave it at that. So you want to be sure to take care of your garden and look. There's a lot of different things you can do. I have this little guide. I don't know if you can see that. You probably can't. But it's basically, it shows bad garden bugs of California. And it shows you what they are. So you can kind of see like, oh, this one's not good for this type of veggies, or these are good. There's some beneficial insects, right? That you can look at here in California or whatever area you are. I know there's some really cool apps nowadays that you can actually like scan a leaf and it will tell you what type of tree it is, exactly what type of tree it is. It's really neat. There's probably one out there that can do the same with identifying insects or something like that. So you can kind of look into some of those things. So let's see, with watering, at first you want to water when you transplant, you want to water it daily, but not soak. Don't soak it, right? Then you want to water 2 to 3 times a week. Once it's established, maybe even once a week, when it's well established, depending on what area you live. Some areas you're going to need more water because it's hotter. Here in the valley, we probably need more water because the heat is coming. It's going to be 90 degrees this week. So, and not too much. You never want to leave your veggies in a situation where they're soaking, and it's kind of flooded. That's going to produce rot, and it's going to for your veggies. So be sure to look out for that. So let's see, some fertilizers. Fertilizers, depending on your needs, of course, and they help. Basically, depending on what you need, depending on what your soil needs are and what your veggies need are. Some veggies require more, some veggies require less. It just depends. So it's easy nowadays. You have Google, you can look it up. When you have an issue with a certain plant, say for example, you see like little burning at the edge of your tomato plant. So you can go in there and discover like, oh, it's actually a nutrient deficiency, so I should add some of this, or the other way around, oh, it actually needs this, or it's a certain insect that's causing it. So you can kind of research a lot, right? And with fertilizers, you really don't want to add them to herbs because they can alter the taste of them. So just be aware of that. Weeds are most of the time not good. So be sure to stay on top of them, pull them out, because they become competitors to your veggies. So if you just don't worry about it and just leave your weeds out there with your vegetable garden, then you're probably going to have small fruit because they're competitors. Some weeds are good, depending. Some weeds are good because they bring in like good insects and so forth. And one way you can minimize like weeds is basically with mulch. You can add mulch around, and it kind of prevents the sunlight from hitting the ground, so it doesn't give them that life that they need. So that's one way you can do it. So that's that. And the last thing is the harvest. This is what we're looking forward to, right? This is the harvest. So this is what we want. So with the harvest, very easy, just a few steps. You basically want to watch and be ready, right? You don't want your veggies. That's why you go out there on a daily basis and see, oh, these are almost ready, or these are more ready, and so forth. So you're just watching, and you pick them at the right time, because if you don't pick them at the right time, depending on what it is, it can go bad, you know. And one of the things we did when I worked at this farm is for example, with romaine lettuce, we planted it every week, a new batch every week. Because if you plant everything at the same time, sometimes, or the same, it's usually not a problem in small scale, but if you plant, everything's going to be ready at the same time, and you can't eat it all at the same time. So if you wait a week, or wait 2 weeks, or wait, 2 weeks is good. You wait, and then you plant another of the same crop, then okay, these are going to be ready. And then in 2 weeks, these are going to be ready. So I'm going to eat these, or I'm going to share these, and so forth. You understand that? So you kind of can do that. Greens and onions are things that you can pick pretty much at any time. You can pick the kale leaves and so forth, and they'll grow back. So, or onions, you can pretty much eat them at any time. And then you can preserve stuff as well, like canning. I don't know how many people do canning nowadays. Does anybody do canning? No? Okay. Well, we do canning sometimes when we have extra stuff, or people give us, some extra fruit and stuff. It's really good way to preserve food long term. So that's one thing you want to do. I think this was it. I think that was all I wanted to share at this time. But I have some resources that I can share with you, but this is just like the basics of what you can do for a garden, right? So you basically prepare, you plan out what you need and what grows in your area, and then you start preparing your soil, and then you plant your things, and then there's like some maintenance, not much. Some fruits and veggies need more attention than others. So depending on your schedule and so forth. Right now you're home, so you have all this time, so you can plant whatever you like. So I hope this was beneficial. Hope this helps some of you. And I don't know everything. I just know a few things. So this is what I Anil, I think you wanted to ask some questions.